and welcome to the Hell Project. Let me know if you can hear me and everything is working well. We're going to be doing a study in Matthew, really wanting to dig into Matthew carefully, thoroughly, looking at the different ways that Matthew shows Jesus, but also shows what judgment looks like, as that's the topic of this channel, and just making sure that everything is working. I'm going to introduce Darren Clark in a moment, so feel free to follow along. Have Matthew open in front of you. I'd recommend that. I'm going to have it on the screen in a bit as well, and just want to introduce an overview to the gospel before we really dig into one specific chapter, chapter 2, with Darren. I'm going to get Darren on the screen, check that his sound is working, and so Darren, say hello. How's it going? How's isolation treating you? And social distancing, and are you wearing PPE at the moment? What does aged care look like at the moment? Hold on, sorry Darren, it looks like my audio is playing up again. Let me try that one and see how that works. Can you, I think I've got to, so if you say, alright, that's changed that one. Hold on 1 second, let me just go into my advanced properties and find my settings and why they're playing up. This happened last time. It's having changed from a Mac. This is going. It's changed a few settings. Here we go. So it should be that one, and then I can't seem to hear myself when I'm on that. Hi Chris, welcome to the stream where I am botching up the sound again. Right, let me just go into, I think, sound preferences. I just need to check that one of these things is actually working. Yeah, that should be, that's not picking up anything. Right. Oh, okay, so we're going to be doing a bit in Matthew. Once I've figured out why this is not working again, so I can see my audio track is picking myself up. It's not picking Darren up for whatever reason, though it was just a moment ago. So I've just got to go into a setting and just check that it's got the right thing coming up. So I've got audio capture, multi-output device, should work, and it doesn't seem to be. There we go. So Darren, can you speak again and see if anything comes through?
Yeah, g'day.
Hello, that
hello,
looks like it's working. Chris on the stream, if you can let me know if that's worked. That seems to have whatever picked itself back up. Right, as that's going through. Right, Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. I'm going to introduce it. If Chris, you can tell me if you heard Darren. Darren, just say a couple things. Just you're working in aged care. You're saying you're not in PPE at the moment.
No, we're actually lucky here. We didn't get it didn't get into the aged care system down where I work. Barely has in our country, and that's critical. So yeah, we're just still. I wouldn't call it a lockdown, but we're really cautious, not letting people in. Just prevention is better than cure. So we haven't had to use a lot of that equipment yet. So fingers crossed.
Good. Okay, so I'm just you can be heard. I'm just seeing if I can lift up your volume a little bit. There we go. I think so. Uh, we're seeing numbers are going down in
Yep.
Australia, or at least
Yep.
plateauing.
Well,
And you,
they're almost flatlining. We only had 7 cases yesterday, so that's it's been doing that for a while. But part of that has been, well, the question of, is that because just the overseas transmissions that we had been importing has stopped, and we just haven't detected community transmission or whatever, so they're increasing the testing to try and find that. So I don't know exactly what's happening, but it's like, you can't, with a virus like this, you can't
yeah,
just assume it's all going to go away.
no, and whatever normal looks like, it's not going to look normal anymore. I
Yeah,
think I've just turned you up quite a bit. Chris is kindly feeding back on your volume levels as we go through this. It's
sure.
should be approaching about the right level now.
Okay.
Um, thank you, Chris, for feeding back to me. Hopefully, he's a bit louder. Cool. So, fairly standard, I'm afraid, on Hell Project at the moment is technical issues, but that's the way it goes. So, thank you for joining in. I think if people are watching, thank you for coming along to this, and hopefully my tech and issues will sort them smoothen out as we go. So just to look at Matthew, really, the Gospel being one of the earliest records of Jesus' life and teachings, and it's aimed at a Jewish audience, and dated somewhere around 60 to 90 AD. I mean, there's quite a range there. Do you have an opinion on the dating of Matthew at all, Darren?
Look, not
No.
anything firm. If usually with me, unless something like that is relevant to the exegesis, I don't really go firm on
Yeah.
it. So
Cool.
yeah.
We'll keep moving. I don't go
I
that.
mean, it was in the 1st century, and it was probably before 70 AD. But other than that, yeah. And the reason that scholars have is because they used that to try and put the sources in a particular time, and then they can reinterpret that. So I would if I had to, but I've never felt the need to.
Dating text and things like that is definitely not a specialty of mine or an area of expertise. So I'm going to only speak to where I'm comfortable and confident. And Darren, you're here to help me with the exegesis, and that's the idea behind this. Is we really want to get into the text, because oftentimes when dealing with the topic of hell, it becomes a discussion of proof text, single verses out of their context. And I think Rethinking Hell, which Darren contributes to, does a really good job of digging into the context. And Darren, I'll have to say your multi-part series response to Stand to Reason recently was excellent, and you've gone into a lot of depth and study for that. So I just want to say that was a great example of exegesis and context, and how that can really bring out the meaning and the strength of the conditionalist argument.
Thank you.
So with Matthew, we're not wanting to go into single verses and go, hey, look, here's conditionalism. We want the text to speak. And so before we really focus on the later half of chapter 2, I think it's important just to get the full context of Matthew as a whole. I'm not going to do an extensive overview. There's Bible Project who does a fantastic job of that. There's commentaries. You can get your own if you really want an in-depth study. But I think just for my own good as well, hopefully, Darren, you'll enjoy this as well. Digging into the text is really important. So I thought, well, why not do this live? I mean, we're all in isolation. We might as well have a little bit of a Bible study. And so this is going to be multiple parts. We might end up down some rabbit holes that lead us to carry on chapter 2 in another session. But that's fine. I think there's enough in the book of Matthew that's going to keep us going for longer than this multi-part series. So Matthew's audience, I just want to point out, is a Jewish audience. They would be generally Jewish Christians, probably a church specifically in mind. And with that, there's not only statements that are directly, this is to fulfill X scripture, or as the author says, but there's also allusions to the Old Testament throughout that we'll try and dig into a bit where it is helpful to the discussion, or just say here's a resource that you can look into further. Some of the stuff I'm getting, just a couple resources very quickly. I've got R.T. France's commentary. The reason I got that one specifically was because it was recommended by the Bible Project, who I'm quite a big fan of. And then also I'm sort of digging into some of the stuff through Kenneth Bailey, who's done a lot with parables. So we'll probably end up looking at some of the stuff from them. But they, as I said, I'm learning. I'm leaning on a lot of expertise, and I think that's the whole point of going into the Bible. But also the heart of this is that we get something about who Jesus is that applies to our own theology and our life. And hopefully, if you're not a Christian, that this will help you see how we should be reading the Bible and not just tearing things out of context. And so the first half of Matthew, which I'm not going to read Matthew 1, we'll read chapter 2 in a bit. But if you've got Matthew 1, I'm just going to put that on the screen just very quickly so you can see it. Matthew 1 is fascinating because it's not exciting in a like Mark jumps straight into the action, and Luke develops characters very much, developing each character, and you start to get engaged with the story. With Matthew, it's like straight into a genealogy, and it's for Western eyes that's quite a random thing to do. But this is so important. There's two main factors of the genealogy that's so important. It connects Jesus to Abraham, the father of the Jewish faith, and it connects Jesus to David, the Messiah or Christ. We will talk about that in a moment. Will be coming from the line of David and was also part of Israel. And so we've got this whole line set up, and that's why the genealogy is really important. And it might seem a little boring and a bit of a waste of space from Western eyes, but that's the problem. If something seems like that in the Bible, generally it's our culture and the lenses we bring to the text that cause the problem. And so we go through, interestingly, 14 generations to David, and then 14 generations after Babylon, and then Babylon to Christ, 14 generations. So 14 is quite an interesting number. 7 is the number of completeness. I'm not going to read into that anything other than there's some important stuff about numbers. And we're going to keep moving on. So after genealogy, Matthew's basically laying out his theology to the people he's writing to. He's saying, look, this guy Jesus is really important. He's connected to Abraham. He's connected to David. Let's see how he sets up his kingdom. And so we've got then the birth of Jesus Christ, and what's really important, this is about theology straight away. This isn't about developing characters, as I said before. We've got Jesus is connected to God by the Holy Spirit straight away in verse 18. We've got Joseph's responses rather than Mary's, which is interesting as well. We've got Joseph called the son of David by the angel of the Lord, so directly emphasizing that Jesus is from the line of David. And then we've got the Holy Spirit again in verse 20. And then we've got Jesus' mission statement, which is odd for the Jewish ears because they're expecting a Messiah, a Christ, who will liberate Israel and set up a state and liberate them from Roman occupation. But here Matthew's saying actually Jesus is going to forgive sins, which is an potentially odd mission statement for the Christ, the Messiah, the one that was intended to come from the Old Testament. We're going to look at a little bit of what Christ or Messiah is in a moment. But this is really what Matthew is saying to his audience. This is a really important person connected to the Old Testament. And we see a connection directly to Isaiah. Look, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son. They'll name him Emmanuel. Emmanuel meaning God with us. These are direct links to the Old Testament, but also connecting Jesus to God, Jesus to David, Jesus to Abraham. And actually, if you're a Trinitarian like I am, you start to see Trinity in this with the Holy Spirit, God, Jesus in there as well. And that's a lot in 7 verses. That's really dense theology right in there. So two questions really, Darren, for you to sort of unpick there. How would you explain what Messiah or Christ, the two words mean the same thing, just to be clear there, Christ being the Greek for Messiah and Messiah meaning anointed one. How would you describe that to someone coming to this for the first time?
You've already written notes that I'm just going to use. Basically, anointed one is you might think of the anointed one as God's chosen one or agent on this earth to do His bidding. So, what you regard the anointed one as if God is there, yeah. But in Matthew, he's an atypical he's atypical Messiah. If you do any research in the background, in the preceding century, excuse me, there was a lot of emphasis on a military kind of leader that would liberate them from the Greeks or the Romans and so forth. But in the Christian thought, that he becomes like, he's actually doing a bit more of what God would do, is forgiving sins. And I've read a book years ago, so I don't have the details in my head, but Jesus even he replaces the temple, and you see hints of that just in Emmanuel, God is with us. But then, I can't give you the details, but it's like Jesus is the place that you come and meet God. So he's a different kind of Messiah than what they would have expected. They would have stood out if they had that other idea of Messiah in mind. It doesn't mean that the other ideas aren't there, but there's something more profound about this Messiah. And so there's nothing untoward if he's atypical that he goes on to die, which would have been in that context, your Messiah, the conqueror, dies. That would have been really weird for them. Whereas we're like these days, we expect the story to end in his death. Whereas for them, that's this stuff about connecting it back to the old, that's run of the mill for them in a way, where it's new to us because we just don't think of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it can't be undervalued the extent to which we take that kind of thing for granted, that the good person dies. That's so steeped into our culture now that we just go, yeah, that's just a good movie.
Yeah.
But for
it's
them,
a failure, isn't it? If your expectation is that you got to conquer you're conquered and you've got someone to liberate you and they die, and the Romans, they didn't just kill him. The whole idea was to humiliate them and so forth. That you've somehow, as a Christian, you've got to show that actually was not that wasn't the end. That wasn't, that was actually their triumph, not the not the defeat. And so he's very atypical. So that's true of all the presentations in the synoptics of Jesus. He's not exactly what you would have thought, as a typical Jew, and that's probably why it was confronting to them.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So I think just to emphasize chapter 1 and the context there, that Matthew is making sure the audience know how important Jesus is. They understand his authority before hearing his teachings in later chapters. So the teachings are coming later. We haven't heard anything from Jesus. This is Matthew going, this is a really important person I need to tell you about. And that's kind of where the next chapter is headed. So we're going to be mainly focusing on chapter 2 because there's enough in chapter 1 that we could do probably a video on it. But the stuff that we're really wanting to get into is in chapter 2. But before we get to where Darren's focus is, Darren's done a really good amount of study for this video, which I really appreciate. And he's sort of itching to get into that. But I think it's really important that we go into the second chapter and just get the context of what's going on in chapter 2. So I'm going to read from verse 1 and we get an idea of the story. But the main section that we're going to be digging into is from verse 13. But here we go. So after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, in the time of King Herod, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the one who is born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was alarmed, and all Jerusalem with him. After assembling all the chief priests and experts in the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem of Judea," they said, "for it is written this way by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are in no way least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.'" Just to highlight there, it's another emphasis of pointing to the Old Testament. And so we have here what I really like about the Net Bible. So if you're not sure about this translation, you can select ESV to check that it is actually legitimate. But also it points to Micah 5:2. So this is going straight back to the Old Testament. Then Herod privately summoned the wise men and determined from them when the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and look carefully for the child. When you find him, inform me so that I can go and worship him as well." After listening to the king, they left, and once again the star they saw when it rose led them until it stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they shouted joyfully. As they came into the house and saw the child with Mary, his mother, they bowed down and worshipped him. They opened their treasure boxes and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. After being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back by another route to their own country. So that's the setting we have. Herod's looking for the child for some reason. He wants to worship him. That's all we know so far, unless you've read ahead, which some of you might have. So we've got connections to the Old Testament again, but this time by people that aren't. So Herod's searching for what this Messiah is. He knows that they're expecting some uprising. He isn't going to worship. He wants to know so he can do something. But I'm giving a bit of the story away there. So is there anything in that first half of the chapter, Darren, that you want to point out? Is there anything that helps the context for the rest, or is that enough to kind of lay the groundwork?
There's a lot I want to say, but that's enough. Because it'll turn into its own study.
Yeah. There is loads
except to say, I guess you can see there's a or you get indications I was saying before about Jesus being like, if he's the agent of God and they're going and worshiping him, and he's all that connection, that's really unusual to go and worship him. So that's something for people to follow up and just note Herod's the faux desire to worship Jesus. It turns out he wants to actually destroy him. So, but there's not. I mean, there's a lot more I could say, but what you've said is great.
Cool. Okay, so pretty much over to you to introduce the next bit then. So pretty much you're on screen. I'll go into the. I'll have the browser up when you're reading scripture and pointing to things later on. But really over to you.
All right. Okay, so I should point out before I start, this is what I would term as a bit of a rabbit trail or rabbit hole study for me. I haven't looked at any commentaries. What I've done is just looked at the text and just looked at some key words and just gone, I'll just investigate that, and then just exploded from there, and just kept looking at doing my own study. So what would happen for me is that I would put something on paper like this, go back later, look at some commentaries, and go and realize, there's some other connections that I've been completely oblivious of. Might be some Old Testament connections, or like later on one of them, there's it's a quote from the Old Testament. I haven't even looked that up, but it's not important to the points I want to make here, because what stood out to me from this passage that we're looking at was just the way that Matthew is talking about death, and in the conversation about hell, often this language or how we regard death is a critical or turning point of the discussion. So one group, conditionalists, will have one idea of death in mind, while another group, the traditionalists, will have another. idea, and then we'll have similar ideas, and it swaps around, and we get accused of dragging non-existence into the meaning of death and so forth. But I figure that if we just look at the natural way that Matthew talked about, Jesus and Matthew talked about or referred to death, it actually just gives us I think, something tangible with which to say, hey, you know what? This is what death means to Matthew. And maybe if we look later, through this study, I'll relate it to Matthew 10:28, which I think is talking about the body and soul, the whole person being slain in Gehenna. There's death. So I hope that means that we have a better basis from which to explain our understanding of death. And people won't be able to just say, this is what hey, death means to you're just importing non-existence into it, which isn't true anyway, but I think this is a tool to help us explain it. So is that okay, Phil? Has that been clear?
Yep, that's great. That's absolutely fine. Yep.
Right.
Keep going.
So what I'm going to do, excuse me, is read. Oh, I'd rather if you read it, Phil, because I don't read very
Okay,
well.
no
Read
worries.
out very clearly. But Matthew 2:13-23, please.
Cool. Happy to. Just checking. Yeah, I am. I am live. So here we go. After they had gone on, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to look for the child to kill him." Then he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and went to Egypt. He stayed there until Herod died. In this way, what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet was fulfilled. I called my son out of Egypt. And that's a reference to, I'll just quickly check that, that's a reference to Hosea 11:1. When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he became enraged. He sent men to kill all the children in Bethlehem and throughout the surrounding region from the age of 2 and under, according to the time he had learned from the wise men. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud wailing, Rachel weeping for her children, and she did not want to be comforted because they were gone. And just a side note to that, that's in Jeremiah 31. So after Herod had died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother, and returned to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. After being warned in a dream, he went to the regions of Galilee, came to a town called Nazareth, and lived there. Then what had been spoken of the prophets was fulfilled, that Jesus would be called a Nazarene.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. All right, so just focusing just to start, the first rabbit hole I went down when I was studying this came from Matthew 2:13. Rise and take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. So if anyone's familiar with the hell debate in general, Matthew 10:28, and the meaning of the word destroy there, apolumi, is a bit of a key debate within that larger debate. Phil, I'm getting hissing. Is that coming through for you guys? Yes, I'm getting a lot of hissing.
It's clear for me.
Okay, as long as it's right for you guys,
I'll mute my mic. I don't know actually.
Don't know. If it's not coming through with everyone else, it doesn't matter. I can live with it. I just
cool. Yeah, it might be my laptop.
Okay, so basically, apolumi is being used there when Matthew 2:13 is saying, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. If you know, you've got this idea here, it's in an active sense, or it could be, in this case, it's an infinitive, but you've got one person seeking to destroy another. And conditionalists, if you've seen the debate, conditionalists will often argue or follow Glenn Peoples in that argument that says within the synoptics, whenever you've got that verb apolumi being used of one person destroying another, it means to slay or to kill. If just for the uninitiated, what I mean by synoptics, I mean Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as opposed to John, who's a different one. So if you were to think of it like, you know how when you watch movies and you're watching a movie, you go, oh, look, I've never seen this movie, but I can just predict the plot because they just say similar to the previous kinds of movies. It could be a horror movie. They've got a similar plot. They've got a similar synopsis. That's a little bit what like Matthew, Mark, and Luke are like. They're very similar, and you can line them up, put them together in one synopsis. That isn't to say they haven't got differences. In fact, you can't. Yeah, you can very obviously see that there's great differences, but they've got the same basic plot. Where John he does his own thing in his plot, but it does afford us the ability to say, well, what kinds of patterns of speech do you see, or patterns of reference, or patterns of use of imagery that you can find within a corpus, and they are considered their own corpus. So you can do a study and you can say, excuse me, when you see apolumi used of one person destroying another, it always means to slay. So that's an example there. Where are we? Where are we? Matthew 2:13, but there's plenty of others in the Synoptic Gospels, like Matthew 2:14, where the Pharisees conspired together about how they might kill Jesus, or Mark 3:6, where the Pharisees plot to kill Jesus, and so forth. You can find that. And I'll just point everyone to Glenn Peoples' article called The Meaning of Apolumi in the Synoptic Gospels. You just can go to the rethinkinghell.com website and just type in the search bar in the Synoptic Gospels, and you'll get that article come up. But I wouldn't say it's a hard and fast rule in the sense that grammar must obey our rules, but you can see that pattern, and we can see it's a rule in the sense that, you know, if they always use the word that way, then we can expect in that one instance in Matthew 10:28 for it to be used that way. And so I just wanted to work off a little bit. So traditionalists will often say, respond, and actually, sorry, I'm just reading my notes. At times, traditionalists respond to this argument by saying that the very fact that the translators chose the word destroy to translate apolumi in Matthew 10:28 means that verb cannot mean to slay in that verse, right? So this is why Matthew 2:13 was I thought kind of significant to address that argument. I've pulled up a few different translations. So you've got NIV. NIV says they translate as to kill him, ESV to destroy him, NASB to destroy, and the ISV, International Standard Version, is kill him. But I'd ask people whether the fact that the word destroy, the English word destroy, is used to translate it, whether that has any bearing on the meaning of the verse at all. What would you say, Phil? So the difference between, if I said I'm going to kill you as opposed to I'm going to destroy you in that verse, does it change the meaning?
Not at all. It's quite interesting that that's one of the reasons of doing this study, is that when it comes down to single words like this, the context is quite clear. Destroy means kill. Kill means
Yes.
destroy. You can use both.
Yeah. Well, see, that's because in English we have a similar range of meaning for destroy. So we do use it to mean kill. We use it to mean other, to refer to other things. But it does. That's why. But it's in that context in Matthew 2:13. It's synonymous, right? No one quibbles over that at all.
Yeah.
No, so if I were to say to you, excuse me, got a little bit of phlegm in there. But if I was to say to you that with 2:13
and just point out that some translations use destroy and some use to kill, but it really doesn't change the meaning. They're just synonymous. You wouldn't fight that. No one. I can't imagine anyone ever saying, "Well, actually, no, you're wrong on that's the wrong way to argue." But when I've said the same thing about 1028, it's a different story. Yeah, and I'm not meaning to say that just because 213 he does it there that he must also, but it just do it in 1028. But it just shows that Matthew himself was capable of using destroy with that sense of kill, and translators regard it as such, and they can just use two separate words with the same meaning of to slay, to kill. Yeah, and there's no fuss about it.
Yeah, and we will end up in chapter 10 at some point, so we will get there. But I think that's really important just to note on the outset that translators are happy using destroy as kill, kill as destroy. The context is quite clear that that's what it means, and it just face value. I mean, you're talking quite a lot about the plain reading in your series with Stand to Reason. The plain reading here, we're all happy. I think traditionalists, conditionalists are all happy that this is a kill instance. So it is odd that oftentimes, and this might come up in a bit more discussion, oftentimes the traditionalist is more inclined to go towards the lost son from the prodigal story or the lost coin. And then oftentimes, I'll save that for later on. So that's a hint. Spoiler alert. Keep going.
What I was going to say, I think as you were talking, you triggered my memory for why I brought that up. In Chris Date's recent, well, it was a debate at the end of last year with Dr. Tony Costa, and Chris was working through the evidence, and he was working through the same argument that I said, that I just alluded to here, where he's working through instances where apolumi, when used of one in the synoptics, when it's used of one person apoluming another, it means to kill, to slay. And we get to the point of 1028, and Dr. Costa would say, yes, it means that, and then get to 1028 and goes, no, it doesn't. And one of the reasons that Dr. Costa cited right at the end, I can't remember whether it was in the Q&A or in the debate per se, he said, but it's translated as destroy. And see, what people do is they look at that word destroy in 1028 and they go, it can't mean to slay, or then they go off on that they use that as the pivot point, I think, to try and argue that it can't mean to kill, whereas they wouldn't do that with 213. It just wouldn't occur to them. And so what I'm saying here is we need to maybe just use Matthew 213 to rein that in a bit, and point to traditionalists and say, look, you wouldn't do it there, so why are you doing it here? And maybe it's not just us saying it, but look at the pattern of Matthew. Look at how he's normally talking about death and using that verb. Yeah, that's all. That doesn't solve the debate.
I think it only gets stronger as well as we go through this chapter. So let's keep going.
Well, the second response that I get from traditionalists is to argue that apolumi has a range of meaning. Now that's where you were going, and so they might look at wineskins, or like what's the other, John 6:12, where there's food that they're collecting and it might be lost to spoilage. So it's lost, it's gone. You could say you could even translate it as spoil. And then what they'll do, they'll take that and they'll treat it like a menu. So you've got they'll look up a lexicon, or they'll note the different ways that it's translated, and they'll go, I like that. That's the one that we want from Matthew 10:28. Now, where am I? So I just kind of, that idea of choosing, like pulling up a menu of meanings and just choosing the one that you want to insert into a given verse. Again, they wouldn't do that for 213. Excuse me, I've lost some of my text here. Anyway, so what I wanted to say that in that context, say in 213, there's clear contextual indicators, are there not?
Yeah, massive
Yeah.
indicators, and especially as you go through to the following verses, that
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
if you thought destroy was some sort of ruin, well, I'm never sure in that argument if destroy means ruin, what that means for a human and other than death.
Yeah.
I've not once received a good answer. If any answer, usually it's dodged. And when I've asked that directly, what does a ruined human look like? And it's generally ignored. But the whole context here is quite clear that destroy, when it comes to a human, means death.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think if there's any
I,
translation problem with that word, you
yeah.
just read a couple verses later and you've got it.
Yeah. I should probably add, like with 1028, I'm reading body and soul as a merism that said, that points to the whole person, just like heaven and earth at the beginning of the Bible just points to everything in the cosmos. God created heaven and earth. Doesn't mean he didn't. It's not saying he didn't create the sea or he didn't create animals, because he goes on and talks about that. So that's how I'm looking at that. So yeah, at least we have that pattern, and this 213 beds that down. But if you move on to 216, there's another way that he's talking about death. So then Herod went, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and all in all that region, and who were 2 years or old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Now, it's just saying he's using a different word for kill there than what I had seen before. But you can see there's a bit of a he's using that word. It's aniro. Sorry, Chris Date, if I pronounce it wrong with accents, but it means to kill, basically, in the New Testament, and it's used here. You can tell within that context that it's similar to apolumi. It's just destroy to slay. But in this instance, I did a study just to see what that word is, what its range of meaning is. It normally means, throughout the New Testament, means to kill. It's an idea gained from its basic meaning is to take up and take away, or bring up, and it in the preceding centuries before the New Testament, it had something. It was used in various ways, like you might use it of your enemy. You lift their head up off the ground and slit their throat, or you might take up a body and take it away to bury it, or you might do away or dispense with an opponent's argument or something like that. But it comes from that basic idea of taking up and taking it away. But in the New Testament, it predominantly is used for killing. But there's two instances where it isn't, and the context tells you clearly. There's cues in the context where killing doesn't make sense. One of those is Hebrews 10:9, right? So it says in there, then he added, "Behold, I have come to do your will." He abolishes the first in order to establish the second. Okay, so abolishes, that's where aniro is there. It doesn't mean to kill, because it's an inanimate object. Now that gets back to what you were talking about, Phil, where there's a difference here between sentient beings being done away with and something that is an inanimate object or a concept or an abstract concept. You can't literally kill something that's not alive. Okay. So really, when I looked at that, and I thought, oh, that's kind of in parallel to how the debate about apolumi goes down, because we conditionalists want to look at this and say, hey, here's this pattern of talking in the synoptics. When one person apolumi is another, it means to slay, and then you've got traditionalists going, well, hang on, here's a broader range of meaning. Hey, look at this. Look at it means to ruin. Look at the wineskins, and they go, okay. My question to them is, would you ever do that with this word? With an arrow, would you ever go and say, look, we can see these clear instances of that word being used to kill another, but then turn and go to Hebrews and say, well, here's another meaning. And I know it doesn't have much to do with, it's clearly hasn't to do with a living person, so it doesn't mean to kill there. And then try and argue that must be the meaning in 2:16, Matthew 2:16. Would they do that?
Yeah. No, because of the context, and that's what one of the frustrations I think for me, and I know Chris has said it on his live chats as well, that the arguments from the traditional camp are the reasons I'm a conditionalist, because I'm trying to be consistent throughout how I read the Bible, and the consistency here that I can see is you look at one, you look at kill in one place where it's translated kill, and then you look at the context to get, yes, that's definitely what it means about these children, and then you look at the context of Hebrews, and that makes more sense, and then you look at the context of as we go. And so that's the consistent way of doing that. But for some reason with destroy in Matthew 10:28, it doesn't happen that way. It's not consistent.
Yeah.
And so it's a frustration of mine, definitely.
Well, what I'm trying to get even one step behind that and just show how I think, and if I was to work with a traditionalist with this, I would try and use this chapter to show Matthew 2, to show how they would normally deal with words, how they would normally handle words, and then take that to Matthew 10:28. And that's what I think this helps us to do. That's what I'm trying to do. And that's why I kind of see as Matthew 2:13 to 23 as a key chapter, not so much for proving what Matthew 10:28 means, but showing us how we normally handle language. For some reason, it changes when it gets to that. The normal rules that we would normally use seem to get thrown out, or at least minimalized, to make the case. So I'm going to move on to the next example I had, because I actually want to just, there's a, what was I going to say? It's really interesting. The use of that word anaro in Acts 7:29. I want you, Philip, to read that out and then try and tell me where you think the 3 times that word is being used in that passage.
Right, okay. So we've got
Now, bear in mind, anaro normally means to kill, but there's one exception.
Okay, so we've got 7:20 to 29.
Yep.
So at that time Moses was born, and he was beautiful to God. For 3 months he was, sorry, I was just checking that I am actually on sound. So for 3 months he was brought up in his father's house, and when he had been abandoned, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. So Moses was trained in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in his words and deeds. But when he was about 40 years old, it entered his mind to visit his fellow countrymen, the Israelites. When he saw one of them being hurt unfairly, Moses came to his defense and avenged the person who was mistreated by striking down the Egyptian. He thought his own people would understand that God was delivering them through him, but they did not understand. The next day, Moses saw 2 men fighting and tried to make peace between them, saying, "Men, you are brothers, why are you hurting one another?" But the man who was unfairly hurting his neighbor pushed Moses aside, saying, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us?" To 29, wasn't it? Yep. You don't want to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian yesterday, do you? When the man said this, Moses fled and became a foreigner in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons.
Right. So take a guess.
Yeah. So having seen that it's lifted up, I guessed that it was. No, I say guessed because the first. I did see some notes, so I had a look before. But I guessed brought him up because of the lifted him up. But I also guessed the kill in verse 28.
Yeah.
And I think it's both of those.
It's used twice in 28.
Yeah.
Do you want to kill me as you killed? Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
And you seeing as I made a lot of it of the killed, it's most frequently used as such in the Acts, in Luke and Acts as such, as killed. Yeah. So if you were to note that and you go, oh, here's a pattern in Luke himself that he uses it that way, you're right to assume that when it's used in the same way. But there's a way he uses it atypically, and you were nearly there with brought him up as their own, but that's not the word. It's adopt.
Yeah. Okay, so on the screen, people can see that it's highlighted there in the Greek.
Yeah.
So you got the three there: adopted and kill and killed are the three same root words in Greek.
But the thing there with adopt, why is it adopt not brought up, is because it's in what's called the middle voice. So you got in Greek, you've got active, you've got passive. So that's the difference between you're doing it to someone else, you're actively doing the verb, or it's being done to you. So excuse me, the middle is it's not in between, but it's this idea of reflexive. So you're doing it to or for yourself. So it's this idea here, and it's in the form of the word. So we look and we go, okay, when it's done when it's verb, we see it in the middle form. We naturally tend to think that there's this reflexive notion to it. So she's taking up. Let's go back to it. She's Pharaoh's daughter, adoptive. She's taking him up and bringing him for herself, adopting. Yeah,
that makes sense.
But just because she, so the idea that I know we can go back and talk about context, but the idea that I wanted to emphasize here was the way in Greek the verb sometimes is presented in a grammatical form. We can see patterns that way, and we can actually say, oh yeah, there's a normal way that, and they use the verb that leads us that way. And with the active voice with Apolumi in 1028, that's the case. So if you want to get an exception to that, then you've got to go somewhere where the context crystal clear tells you the difference. Yeah. And I just wanted this Acts passage to be read just to show that you're not just going to go willy-nilly, just go to the menu and just pick the verb you want. You're looking at the context, but also the very grammar of the word does help us. It's not perfect, because you can always find exceptions to every rule, I think. But yeah, when you see the grammar, when you dig a little bit and you look, it's in the middle voice, it does tell you something. And that shouldn't just be swept aside when we're saying, hey, here's an identifiable pattern of, in the synoptics, when an apolumi is being used and it's of one person apoluming another, it always means, everywhere else other than Matthew 10:28, it means to kill. So again, that was a rabbit trail that just I thought would provide an argument for us, and that came from Matthew 2.
I think it's helpful to look at that, and also for anyone who might come across this that hasn't really dug into the Bible in that way, it might be a new way of exploring words and how they are used within context, what you can do when you dig into one passage as well. And the more I dig into the Bible, the more I am impressed by the skill and cleverness, genius behind the biblical text, the ability to weave in allusions to Old Testament. I mean, the Old Testament is huge. There's a lot of text in the Old Testament, and some of the things that are drawn out, these guys clearly knew the text. They were steeped in this stuff, and so the idea that these guys were some backwater sheep herders writing, or goat herders is the usual term by online atheists, it's just they haven't engaged with this, because these guys are clearly highly literate and well learned. They just didn't have technology and so they're clever, and they're probably more clever than your average internet theologian or internet atheist, as the case might be. They know what they're talking about and really have a message that's resting on the foundation of Judaism. And so they're using that foundation so clearly, and then we can dig into it, and there's this richness and context, and get the meaning out of it. And so that's kind of an aside.
Well, yes, but I'll bring that back a little bit round to what I was saying, because we get accused of say, reading the Old Testament into the New Testament. That happens so frequently.
Yeah.
It's just, okay, all right, yep. But really, what you're talking about is that you've got the New Testament authors, and they were interacting with the Old Testament. What we call the Old Testament, but for them it was the scriptures.
Yeah.
And it's not always clear which version, whether it was exactly where it was that they were pulling it from, but it's clear that they do it frequently, and often you can actually see some verbal parallel. So when they're pulling a text, they're not doing what we do, like we just did here, and we just cite a text. We've got the address. They didn't have addresses. They didn't have Matthew 2:13. They might say as it is written, or they might even just allude to it and provoke someone. Oh, I've heard that before, or that it might be a thematic thing. But one of the ways they do it is by verbal, by using the same kind of language, whether that's from the Old Testament text, or often they did it from the Septuagint. So you look at it and you go, okay, here's a pattern of speaking. So this is what I was getting back to with how verbs, like whether is it an active voice, or is it a middle voice, or is it in this pattern or this way in the grammar? We look at that and we know, oh, gee, they're using something in a very similar way to we know in the Old Testament, and we go, okay, they're pointing us to that. They're telling us to have a look at that, even if you don't initially get it and you notice it, you go, oh, okay, he's pointing back, he's drawing from it. Obviously, there's what we call intertextuality, and where you see that, you go, okay, all right, he's making a point. It may differ, or it may be the same point as the Old Testament, but that the point I'm making is that the way that they use the grammar of their language is one of the ways you can tell, and then you can decide based on that if there's some difference, if he's making a point, if he's I'll give you an example in Isaiah 66:24, where you've got fire, it's unquenchable fire, and the worm that will not die. That's used by Jesus in Mark 9:48.
Yep.
It's almost verbatim. All right. So if we want to ask what they're saying, what Mark meant, what Jesus meant, then the question you need to ask is, well, what is he doing with the language? Yeah. So that pattern of the language becomes important in study in general, and that's what I'm saying we conditionalists do with Matthew 10:28. We just look at how it's normally used, apolumi, and we make a conclusion drawn on that. So if traditionalists want to combat that, they've really got to give us a clear, in maybe a counter case based on the grammar, not just a general list of possible menu of different meanings and just plug it in, but really, if there's no cases in the New Testament, in the Synoptics where apolumi is used differently when it's used to one person apoluming another, so they haven't got that. So the only other recourses come to the context. Yeah. And in Acts here, where we're looking at Acts, it was really clearly the context that gave it away. So that's really why I think the conditionalist case is stronger, because we've actually just got the normal ways that you would identify and understand the meaning of a text. They've got that going for it, where I think with traditionalists, they've got to try and find a way. They've got to try and just slide it in somehow. Yeah. Is that
Yeah.
helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really good. Yeah, just making sure that it's all of that meaning of words in the context is so vital, and often traditionalists will do that well. In most other topics,
Sure.
they will do
Well,
that
they
really
taught
well.
me.
Yeah,
They're the
well,
ones that taught me how to do
that's
that.
it. They taught most of us. I mean, we're
Okay.
most,
Yeah.
if not all of us, we're
Yeah.
traditionalists in that sense, and so it's
So-
important that we make that note.
So all I'm trying to do is use Matthew to show that is to normalise our process. This is normally how we argue. That's all. I'm not, we still have to defend our case from Matthew 10:28. I'm not
Yeah.
not saying that anything other than that.
Yeah,
But there's another
we will get
case.
there.
There's more. Yeah, there's more from Matthew 2:13. I'll read the verse out because I did. It'll help me focus. So 16, 17, 18. Then Herod. So this is Matthew 2:16 to 18. Then Herod when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious and went and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and all that region who were 2 years old and under according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled from what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentations, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. So this stood out to me, not because I want to say that Matthew provides us an example of saying we can talk about hard annihilationism as molecular disintegration and no more. That's what he means, non-existence. But I just want people to note how quickly and how naturally Matthew goes from killing all the children to just saying they are no more, and maybe reflect off that a little bit. Yeah, because I think sometimes in the debate, when I've noticed this when Chris was debating Dr. Costa, when he was saying, I'm arguing that apolumi means to slay in 1028, and Dr. Costa would summarize his case and say, and reply with something like, apolumi doesn't mean to be taken out of existence or to non-existence, something like that. And Chris would say, but that's not what I'm arguing. I don't believe it. That's what I'm saying. The language just means to slay. And then later on in the Q&A, Chris would said something like, I am an annihilationist. And then Dr. Costa would go, but you said you weren't arguing that. So for me, when I stand back and look at the debate, and I've experienced the same thing, it seems like there's this objection to us based on this how would I put it? There's probably two prongs to it, where they think we're arguing that the word killed, like if I went to verse 16 here and you say Herod killed all the male children, they think what we're saying is that word itself means to go out of existence, but we don't say that. We say it means to kill. And to kill just means if you kill someone, you're just taking away their life, and so that all the vital functions cease. So if you kill a body, it's slain, it's lifeless, there's no life. Its vital functions aren't working, so it can't operate, it's not conscious of anything. If you do that to the whole person, body, soul, spirit, then the same thing happens. It stands to reason. But we're not saying the terminology itself means to be taken out of existence. But the logical connection between the two is that if you kill the body and it disintegrates over time, or it's vaporized in a nuclear explosion, it's not wrong to say it's gone. Look at Matthew. Look at the way that it's you've got the two juxtaposed there. So we might even just point out and say, look, the children were no longer among us. Fine, that's all. But it's not wrong for us conditionalists to use that language alongside of killing, or dying, which we define as the loss of life and the ceasing of all vital function, and then to go on and say the result of that means that they're no longer around or they don't exist, irrespective of whether they've got ashes remaining. So I think this verse or this passage helps us to work through that problem. What do you think?
Yeah, I find the whole discussion around existence, non-existence, death being non-existence slightly odd. I can't quite pin the problem on it yet. But that whole conversation with Dr. Costa was fascinating, because I have no problem with the concept of annihilation being gone, even if it is obliteration. I mean, there's enough pictures in the Bible for that to be the case. I mean, what is ash if not obliteration or annihilation? And so while you were talking, I was just sort of reminded, and you brought it up in the conversation on STR, Mark Corbett's thing on Psalm 37.
Yep.
And Psalm 37, I think, is one of the strongest passages where this idea of the end of the rebellious ones. I'm just going to transition to the browser just so people can see if they haven't interacted with Psalm 37. But it's so easily ignored by the traditional argument. But throughout Psalm 37 there are hints of beyond this life. there's a future for the righteous and there's no future for the wicked. They've got early on in Psalm 37, if I scroll up, there's the wicked are going to fade like grass. They were going to dry up and they'll be like smoke. But the righteous will inherit the land, and you have all of these quite clear language. Wicked men will be wiped out. There will be no more in some translations. They will be gone is in verse 10. You will stare at the spot where they once were, but they will be gone. I mean, that's pretty clear annihilation going on there. They're destroyed totally, and that's exactly what Psalm 37 says as well, further on down. And the future of the righteous will extend, and that in a Jewish thought, that might well be in their memory of those they leave behind. The legacy is so important. We don't get that in our culture as much, but the legacy was what was going to live on. But there's a hint that there's a lasting security in being with the Lord, which the wicked and those who rebel will just not have. And so Psalm 37 has that language that they will be no more. They will be gone. They will be totally destroyed. They'll be killed. They'll be like smoke. I mean, there's so much within Psalm 37 that I think has the same sort of tone as what you're seeing and pointing out in Matthew 2.
Sure.
They were gone. The children were no more. Their personhood, their whatever makes them them, is no more.
Right.
Sorry.
So I would take that and just say, hey, look, here's a pattern of speaking. Like, okay, let's just assume for the sake of the debate that traditionalists are right, that's just talking about an earthly fate. And let's also assume that dualism, which most traditionalists would be. So what they would be thinking to themselves is, yes, it's an earthly thing, but those people aren't taken out of existence because their soul still exists in Sheol or Hades. You go, okay, all right, yep, let's take that up. We still can make, and by the way, I'm only conceding this for the argument.
That's fine. Yeah, no worries.
But let's assume all that. Okay, and that Psalms and Matthew 2 is talking about an earthly fate and they're no more. We still have that connection, this natural idea that death, you can still talk about them not being around. That's where Matthew comes in, because what it's saying is what happens on the earthly realm. I'm not going to actually go to that. It's not an earthly versus cosmic. It's more like you know what man can do on this earth to people. They can only kill the body, but they can't kill the soul. Now, traditionalists will probably say that's some immaterial bit that can't be killed. Well, the body's gone, it's dead and eventually go, but the soul, by definition, hasn't been killed, so it's not gone. So we're not going to say that. But the next part of the verse is there is one who can slay the body and the soul, i.e. the whole person in Gehenna. Yeah? So if the whole person is killed, why is it wrong to say that killed person, the result of that is that they're gone?
Yeah.
Without actually having to say that annihilationism means to annihilate or to take someone out of existence. Yeah? It's a natural way that the Bible talks about death. Yeah. So why can't we follow it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's the strongest thing. Whatever happens to the body, they kill the body, is then happening to the, depending if you're a physicalist. I mean, I am a dualist, so I would see that as whatever's happening to the body happens to the soul. So if we say the body is gone when we are killed, well, if God destroys both body and soul, well, that means both the body and the soul are gone and will be no more. And often there's an unevenness as to what the traditionalists will argue happens to the body and the soul for various reasons, which we'll probably get to more.
I think that they prosecute and without trying to psychologize them, I think it's an advantage. They see it probably is used, this whole idea that what's their response? Okay, like Dr. Costa, he would push back on Chris, saying, but the language itself doesn't mean to be taken out of existence. And I don't understand how you're just arguing that it's to slay and not meaning that it's taken out of existence. Okay, what I'm saying is Matthew just gives us a natural way of talking, referring to death as, yeah, you kill someone, okay? They've lost their life. They're not they got their vital functions are ceased. They're not breathing. They're not thinking. They can't think anything. If that happens to the whole person, they're killed. Yes, that's what it means. But we are to regard them as not being no more. So I, I'm hoping that something like this, conditionalists can use those. I think Matthew 2 and Matthew 10:28 in conjunction to try and speak into that argument. That's really what this was about for me.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, that's really good. So shall we keep going to potentially your point 4?
Yes, I think I did have something from Thessalonians where destruction talks about the lawless man as being kind of no more, but it is a little bit more.
There's a bit more.
There's a bit more to that in the sense that one has other meanings to that word when it's where is it? I'll just quickly say it and then move on.
Oh yeah.
Where are we? Come back. Excuse me, folks.
No worries.
Yeah, so in Thessalonians 2, so 2 Thessalonians 2:8, and then the lawless one will be revealed, from whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing. That whole idea of bring to nothing, it can actually have different meanings. You don't get that range of meaning with the language in Matthew, where it says because they are nothing or they are not. So yeah, that's all I wanted to make that point. But we can move on. The last, I think it's the last talking point we had, and I know we've been going on for a while. In verse 20, in 2:20, you've got, and I didn't make too much of this either. It says, saying, rise and take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. It's bog standard word. It's nasco. It just means to die. There's no real range of meaning in that word, actually. It just always means to die or to be dead. Where are we? All right, but there is another way that death is referred to in that verse. Can you see that?
In verse 20.
Yep.
Yep. We're looking at it.
All right, so I'll read it out again. For those who sought the child's life are dead. In that phrase, there's two ways of referring to death or being killed.
Seeking the child's life,
yeah. So not making too much of this. I haven't done a big study like Glenn Peoples has. The word there is psyche, or suke.
Suke, yeah.
So that's the same word for soul in Matthew 10:28, but here it clearly just means life. And Glenn Peoples did a study where he argues this, the point of all this. So what Glenn did, he looked at a whole lot of examples of suke, how it's not usually translated as soul, as if it's some immaterial part of the body. All right, not immaterial, but immaterial part of the person. And then he's just trying to say that it normally means life, and then plug that into 10:28 and say and just give it an alternate reading. And this is what he says. The point of all this is that it is apparently wrong to take Matthew 10:28 as a hard and fast rule about what can happen to the suke in every possible sense. The saying was simply not intended to anticipate every possible sense of losing one's suke or soul. The answer to the question, can humans take your life, is actually yes, in the here and now. So that's the first part of 10:28. They can kill us in this life here and now, but not ultimately, not forever. It is the not ultimately that Matthew is stressing when he says that men cannot kill the soul. And then he's got, after all, Matthew has already said that Herod could have taken the soul of Jesus, the life of Jesus, had he not been taken into Egypt. So what he's doing there is using just the normal usage of the word psyche as life and just plugging that into 10:28. I'm not telling people to do that, but the idea here is that Matthew 10:28, if we just looked at the normal way that Matthew uses that word psyche as life, or suke, it doesn't. We can't just assume it means referring to an immaterial part of the body, a person, I should say. And so he's not just. He might be just saying, beware. Don't worry about people who can just kill you in the here and now, but beware the one who can kill your body and to really truly take away your life in Gehenna. Yeah.
Yep,
Yes or
that's right.
no, I don't know, but that's how putting it back into Matthew's own context through how he uses words normally helps you to think and come to a verse with a new eyes. Yeah.
And I think that's really important, just looking into those words. I mean, you can really dig more deeply into this passage, various other things, but ultimately, Herod was seeking Jesus' life to remove him from the equation so that he wouldn't be a threat to his kingship, because
Yeah.
even Herod understood this to be a promised king, and a promised
Yeah.
king threatened his rulership, and therefore he wanted to kill him. And all of
He
that, I
wanted to
think
end
that's
him.
yeah, wanted to end him. He wanted to make sure that Jesus was gone and was no more part of the
But
equation.
notice that when Herod is seeking his suke, like it doesn't make any sense to say he's seeking his immaterial part, his soul,
Yeah,
because he
yeah,
literally couldn't.
yeah.
So that's where what translators will do, they'll go
Oh, we're
something, and that's
frozen.
where they
Oh, there
see
we go. All right.
life. They go to life, and that's actually more often how suke is translated and regarded, but it comes back to context. So I'm not by any means saying Matthew 10:28 must be regarded in the same way. I can defend it from a dualist point of view, where soul represents the immaterial part of the person, because it's just talking about the whole person being killed. But I think what I wanted to do here is end again with just another way of showing how looking at an author himself and how he normally uses words helps inform the debate. And I think what happens with traditionalists, what I observe anyway, is that they only go so far, right? So they might look at various just get enough information to try and make verses fit, like in Matthew, fit their own what they're trying to argue. So they believe from Revelation, all right, and Matthew 25:46 that the those who are going to be punished are going to live forever under that punishment. They're going to be tortured forever. So then what they're trying to do is say, look, Matthew 10:28 or whatever in Matthew has to conform to that. What I would say is that, hang on, back up a little bit and look at the whole of Matthew and start to see how he's using his language, and then try to make a decision based on that. So I will probably make a firmer decision in the future as to whether I'm going to abandon or maybe adapt how I argue about 10:28 based on what I find on Matthew. But at this point, I'm not. But at least I know there's another option that I'm not going to just throw out from
Yeah,
the outset.
but I think you've highlighted some really important things there that people, and they do this from the whole Bible context as well. But you've said it right there. So Matthew 25 is then read backwards into everything else. But
Yep.
surely what's come before, because that's how we read any other book, what's come before should inform us, should be the foundation that the next stage is built on. And so if Matthew 18 talks about eternal fire, which, spoiler alert, it does, then Matthew 25
Yep.
isn't going to completely overrule that. And it's just the
Yep.
same way with Revelation. People read Revelation, those two small passages, verses even, back into everything else, saying that it basically abrogates everything. But one thing I'm just going to end on, starting a study on Revelation as well. While we're doing this study on Matthew, on my website, I'm digging into Revelation as well. And I
Sure.
thought William Tanksley's point was really interesting about progressive revelation.
Yep.
Progressive revelation shouldn't completely changed something that before it was untrue. And so Matthew 25 shouldn't make the original meaning of Matthew 10 or Matthew 18 so different that it has to be reread and worked through. Just like Revelation 14 and Revelation 20 shouldn't change Matthew 10 to make Matthew 10 untrue, or even Psalm 37 untrue. The Old Testament, people could find God through the Old Testament as truth, through the prophets as truth, and the New Testament has built on that truth, not changed it so that it's so distorted that you wouldn't have found the truth that basically Jesus had to teach everyone if he went to Hades. However you view that. That was the can of worms. You can look at that video with Roger Harper later. But however that worked of the salvation of David and Abraham, well, that's really important that they had the truth, that they weren't having to be retaught everything based on progressive revelation. So I thought that point was really interesting. And so this starting point here in Matthew 2 is the foundation block of what will come before. Now, we've already talked about Matthew 10:28 quite a lot in this, but I'm really looking forward to future passages because there's so much in Matthew that we might not even get past chapter 4 in the next
I don't
episode,
plan to
we'll
slow
see.
it down that much.
We'll see. We'll see what happens.
The fundamental thing for me when it comes to this broader discussion, can you still hear me?
Yep,
good. Is it's very easy to have a very shallow view of progressive revelation. So what you were expressing with respect to William Tanksley's this broader comments was this conviction that there is a coherence within the Bible. Like there's when you see progressive revelation, because we believe it's all coming from the one God, it's going to be the same basic message. It's not going to be an about turn. He said this. Oh no, it's actually completely opposite. It's gonna maybe develop what was said earlier. It's gonna maybe be more profound, but it's not going to be completely opposite. Now, for me, it's not just two testaments that you're worried about, but you need to be worried about in biblical theology, which is the field of study that really tells you most about what's going on with progressive revelation. You need to look at what an individual author is saying. You need to pay attention and do studies on that author for what he says in his own way, in his own context. That's what I'm suggesting we do with Daniel. Not Daniel, Matthew. I don't know why I said Daniel.
I don't know where Daniel came from. We've been in Matthew the whole time. We must be close to the end.
That's all I'm suggesting with Matthew 2 is that we let it inform us on how he normally talked about death and how that might tell us something about Matthew 10:28. That's all. There's going to be more that people can pull out, and they can pick the bones apart on other parts of Matthew or the synoptics. That's what I want traditionalists to do, but I want some bona fide stuff, excuse me, where it's like it's not just a menu list of meanings and then we just plug that into Matthew 10:28, but they actually can show us a counter pattern of speaking. Yeah?
Yep.
They might very well do that with Suke in 10:28 and go, it is the soul, because there are some exceptions, and in context, that's great. That's what I want. But what I don't want, and I think is unfruitful for them, it doesn't really get them very far, is if we can present all of these evidence that how Matthew normally speaks in the synoptic, they normally speak this way. In context, it means this, and I think we can show that in Matthew. When we get to it, Matthew 10:20, I can show you the contextual cues that tell us we're right, or that we're on the right track, I should say. It's not just a matter of them not being able to deal with that, but they don't have that counter examples of grammar, drawn from grammar, from the normal usage of words in a specific way. They've just got that generalized, look, a wineskin is destroyed. And then they go to the car. Why do they always go from wineskins to buildings and cars? Right?
We're gonna have to save that for when we get to chapter 10.
Is that normal? But the question I'm getting is that the normal way that Matthew would speak of a person who has died and been destroyed? That's the question. That's all.
Yeah, And it doesn't seem like from chapter 2. Maybe when we get to chapter 10, who knows? No, we'll see. I think from chapter 2 we can see that being killed is similar to an understanding of being gone, and I think we're quite happy with that. And there's quite a lot in chapter 2 that Matthew will build on, and we can then work with as we go through. So
Right.
we'll nail down a time off stream if you're happy to hang around for a minute, and we'll nail down a time for our next study in Matthew and how long we might need to dig into it. But Darren, I just want to thank you for your time, for giving up an hour and a half of your morning to do well, and all the prep that you put into this as well. I'm glad that you're able to share it with us, and I hope that those who interact with the channel, the handful that are doing so at the moment, and I'm going to highlight it on my website as well as a look at Matthew 2 so that people can engage with it. But I think it is a persuasive addition to the scriptural foundation that conditionalism has. So thanks, Darren. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
And we'll look forward to having you on here in a moment. So I'll close up shop and then I'll catch up with you in a sec on Skype. So thank you so much for listening and being part of it. Whatever those of you that were live, I think there's not very many at the moment, but for those who watch later, please do put your comments and feedback in. Is it a persuasive argument, Matthew 2, that talks about death as being gone? Is that something that you would agree is another addition to the conditionalism case? Oh, we want to know. We want to have some pushback. We want to know, do you disagree about suke, how that's used, or apolomai, how that's used, and what it means to kill and be gone? All of the content on this channel is out on the internet to be dealt with, to be challenged, and I do look forward to some critique as and when that might happen. So just some things to let you know that are coming up. We are going to continue doing the Matthew study. That is going to continue over the course. Hopefully Darren can join me for most of those, if not all of them. If not, there might be a couple parts that I'll do. But also on my website, as I said, there's a Revelation study happening. I will make videos of those as we go, but they're kind of a working document at the moment. I've so far done an overview, and I'm working on chapter 1, but finding that it's so dense in theology that it's taking me a while to get through. But I'm engaging with traditionalist commentaries as well as conditionalist ones, and so keep an eye out for that on the website. I've also got 2 interviews lined up. So I've got an interview with Joseph Deere, he's got a ebook that can be found on Amazon for 99 pence or whatever currency you're in. It's not very much, but it's a fantastic defense of annihilationism. Just look up Joseph Deere and the Bible teaches annihilationism. You can see the link on my channel for that interview. That's going to be Friday, 4 p.m. English time. You can do the Google conversions for your time zone. And then I've got a guy named John Tancock, who's a fellow Brit. He's going to be coming onto my channel next Monday afternoon. So I've got these discussions coming up. They're just getting in, to know a couple other people and how they have transitioned to the view of conditionalism and the scriptural basis for it. So I hope you can join in and share the videos to anyone that might be interested. Thank you, Alan, for joining in the conversation and letting us know that you're watching. I hope that was helpful. Any questions, do ping them through. Contact me through YouTube or through my website. And just to sign off, I'm Phil Dunkoff. This is the Hell Project, and it's where I defend the view that without Jesus, we're all dead. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.